Hi, everybody. It's really good to be here. And, Matt, thanks for that. It's very interesting because the very first Stronger Network, I had the big honor of being the first speaker at that conference, Access Now, if you remember. And now I have the huge pleasure of closing this one. So, I feel like two bookends. So as we go, this topic is good to great. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys the thoughts that I sort of gained from this book that Matt and I were thinking about at the same time. So he gave me this topic and we thought, yeah, let's talk about this. And so essentially it's about, many people must have read or heard about the book, Good to Great by Jim Collins. And it's a very interesting book because it details some of the concepts that are very important in understanding how companies, and I believe individuals as well, and indeed nations, can move from the concept of good to great. It's sort of focused on a study of 11 companies that made that leap. And it's all about a continuous and sustained element of success behind, these companies, what made them grow, and sort of measured them over a 15-year period, and so that these companies really leapt into the realms of greatness. And it wasn't just about success in the normal sense. These companies sort of achieved sustained success over a period where they beat the markets and they did so much. I usually talk about media and technology, but this time I find myself talking about business and finance, which is very interesting. So as we talk about this, I'm hoping that we can apply some of these concepts that come out to ourselves as individuals, but also to organizations. And organizations could be churches, which Jim Collins specifically calls out, but also, Christians, just like Aaron was speaking a moment ago, in business as well, people who are running businesses, and also indeed, as I said, to nations. We're called to be salt and light, to the world. And Matthew 5:13-16, I always feel that sort of indicates that we have a role as Christians to fix problems, in the sense of salt to preserve and also light to illuminate. I always sort of think about it as Christians to the rescue. So to preserve what would otherwise die, but also to show the way to others who would otherwise be lost. The way, the truth, and the life is what Jesus is to us, John 14:6. So as I sort of kick into the talk, I just wanted to make a recommendation that for those of you who enjoy audiobooks, there's a great one, which is a summary of this book, Good to Great, narrated by Dean Bukhari on Audible. So if anyone is interested in that, in less than 40 minutes, you could, get the concepts and really, get the gist of what the book was all about. So but what I really want to do as well is that as we go through these concepts, I want to contrast them, for example, with the life of Jesus and also with the early church, and to see what we can learn from the concepts in the book, but also at the same time apply them to our lives as Christians. There is a quote that I quite like to share with you guys that comes from the book. And it says, "Greatness is achieved by working with discipline and humility towards becoming the best in the world for one reason: faith that it can be done." And it can be done. There's something that you're interested in or doing right now, and you might think that you're far from your target or your objectives, but remember that it can be done. It's about long-term buildups of momentum. It's about, what makes this happen. We want to find out what makes a long-term buildup of momentum. And the book begins, the very first chapter, and indeed the very first sentence in the book is the very simple sentence that says, "Good is the enemy of great." Good is the enemy of great. So, and the idea of greatness has so much to do with, it incorporates the concepts of longevity and sustainability. And it's, as I said before, is a long-term buildup. And this is where, the scripture in Zechariah 4:10 sort of comes to mind. And Zechariah 4:10 talks about not disdaining the days of small beginnings. So when we start small, it's a phrase that I sort of love. Start small, but start. Just get something happening, get something doing. And generally on the way, you'll get there. So as we dive in, the question is, what are these concepts? What are these things that help us to essentially move from good to great? And so there are 9 sort of points I want to share and distill from the book. And as we go into them, I hope they encourage you. And that's the whole point of this conference. So the first one is talking about level 5 leadership. something that the book defines as level 5 leadership. And it's characterized by personal humility and professional will. People who have a certain kind of humility that is really deep, really present, but also a dogged professional will to go for it. It reminds me of a phrase by the late Miles Monroe, Dr. Miles Monroe, who said, everything rises and falls on leadership. And that gives you food for thought. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And that's where we start today. Ambition for these kinds of leaders is for the organization, it's for the greater good, not for self. You know, these are people who achieve greatness for their companies, their organizations, the initiatives they're part of, and they're overwhelmingly found typically within the organization. They're people who grew up within the organization. They, you know, if you want to find out where there's a level 5 leader, typically what you need to do is just identify where there's success, where there are good things going on, but no one is claiming credit. That's the idea, where no one is claiming credit, but there's great success going on. You are typically likely to find a level 5 leader there. And also, these are leaders who set up their successors for success. They set up their successors for success. And they leave behind stronger organizations than what they met and not weak successors. So a company that has been led by a level 5 leader will be left greater than it was, you know, when that leader leaves, not weak without them. And if you think about it, John 14:2, you know, this is exactly what Jesus did. And he said, greater works, sorry, John 14:12, he said, greater works than these that I did will you do. And that's the charge that is upon us, you know, the responsibility to go ahead and do greater things that even Christ did, according to his own words. So it's amazing how that contrasts and how that relates, rather. And I quite like to sort of leave it on that first point, on the fact that there is also this importance to look at leadership in the perspective of building, creating, and contributing. And when you do that, you definitely sow a seed and leave something beyond what it is that one met. So first point, level 5 leadership. And it's very important to have that level of leadership that is characterized by personal humility and also a professional will that is very dogged. The second point is about first, who, and then what. So it's all about people. Who, then what. You know, when Jesus was to start his ministry, what's first thing did? He picked a team. He picked a team. So we've got to get the right people on the bus. The book talks about a bus, but I like to use the analogy of a boat. And not only because there were so many analogies of Jesus in the boat, you know, but also not just get the right people in the bus or the boat, but get them onto the right seats. This is also very important. You know, as Matt said, I had the privilege of doing my MBA at Cambridge and the University of Cambridge. And you probably, almost no one can probably go to Cambridge and not have a lecture somewhere where someone isn't talking about the Oxbridge boat race. And that's the boat race between Oxford and Cambridge. And one of the points we discussed on my MBA was the fact that the eight best rowers that the university has to offer are not necessarily the best team of 8. Yeah, they're not necessarily the best team of 8. So you need the right combination of people as well in the right seats. So people who will be sold out to the cause, people with the right character and the right values, people, and those values and character traits certainly trump educational background. Education those are things you can buy, but character and value, those are things that are worth a lot more. So in Acts 4:13, you know, you'll be aware, for those of you who are, that, you know, when there's this part of the Bible when it talks about when they saw Peter and John and they saw their courage, they realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men. But guess what? They said, but they had been with Jesus. And when you've been with Jesus, you know that, you know, certainly something is different and something has changed. And so those values and the character that they gained, that's far more important than any schooling they could have had or anything else. So values will make them the people that we have on our teams. They'll make them do what they're supposed to do. They'll do it better. They'll do it after you, and they will do it even when you're not looking. And that's what, you know, is those values that drive that kind of work ethic. You know, with the right people, you know, you end up managing systems rather than managing the people and chasing after them. So if you have the right people in the boat, You just manage the systems rather than managing people and spending so much time on people. People create culture. It's very important to note. And culture is the way things are done. Yeah. So if you have the wrong people, then you're going to end up with the wrong culture. And then in such a situation, you cannot achieve greatness if you don't have the right people or the right culture. And sometimes we try to incentivize, people to make them do more, do better. And we end up incentivizing wrong attitudes and wrong culture. And, that's no better than trying to fix a skyscraper from the foundation when it's already built. You cannot do that. You've got to go back to the foundations. So sometimes we try to pay people more who are fundamentally flawed, maybe in their character or in their values or in what they're doing, to get them to do better. But you cannot do that. It doesn't work. So when the foundations are bad, when we incentivize, we worsen them. Yeah, so Matthew 25:14-30. Matthew 25:14-30 talks about the parable of the talents, which many people will be familiar with. And in that parable, one guy is given 10, another guy is given 5, another guy is given 1. And the guy who's given 1 does nothing with it, and his value system, his character was fundamentally flawed. The guy who was given 5 was given 5 more. The guy who was given 10 more. And the guy, the 1 from the guy who didn't do anything with it was given to the guy who had the 10. So you can see that incentivization works when people have the right values and the right character and work within the right culture. So, and also when we incentivize the wrong people, it demotivates the right ones, but we cannot be too quick to decide that anyone is right, is wrong. Some people may be in the wrong position, the wrong role, wrong fit. And in certain cases, you might have to move people around, try them in other areas, and then see how they do. And in which case, you can then make a better decision if they're right or wrong for the team. So also, key point, don't put your best people on your biggest problems. Don't put your best people, always put your best people on your biggest problems. Put them on your biggest opportunities. Lead them and cause them to open doors. Okay, so first who, then what? Third point, confront the brutal facts of your reality. So basically face the reality that you're in and maintain, by the way, as you do that, maintain your faith. Okay, whatever those realities are, face them. Be honest about your situation and ask the right questions. That's very important, because asking the right questions leads to good decisions, and good decisions are part of the key to achieving greatness. So if greatness were a door with multiple locks, then certainly one of those locks will be opened by the key of good decisions. I believe that good decisions will be one of those keys. So as a leader, you must lead with questions, not answers. Remain curious. That's very important as well. Engage in dialogue and debate and allow people to input. And also have a lessons learned. The book calls it an autopsy culture, without blame. So let's look at what went wrong, what went right, and build a mechanism to throw up red flags. That's also very important. A system where we can know and figure out what it is that is working and what isn't working, which is also quite key. So, and a system like that requires people to be in a safe space, to feel as if they can communicate effectively without detriment. It requires psychological safety. It allows the real issues to be identifiable and identified, without which you couldn't achieve greatness. Because if you don't solve those fundamental issues, greatness remains a far-flung sort of target. Must be very conscious and deliberate as well about creating that environment, especially, when you have leaders who are fantastically charismatic, but no one wants to disappoint them, but everybody wants to, to be, accepted or good, and no one really says, what's really going on. It's important to make sure that you are able to communicate and have people around you who will be open and frank and say the truth. You always want people to say the truth, whatever it is, even if it's negative. And that led me, I sort of drew a chart. It's about news generally. And if you have on top truth or lie at the bottom, and then left and right, you can have negative and positive. I'm sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint to illustrate this. But if you essentially just think about a 4 quadrant sort of grid with truth, lie, negative, positive. So essentially, if you had a positive truth, that's great. That's good news. That's what you want, something that is true and is positive. But you still rather have truth, even if it's negative. And you might get 2 ticks for positive truth, maybe 1 tick for negative truth. But when you have a negative lie, that's just devil's playground. There's nothing useful there. It's a lie, it's negative, it's just not going to do you any good. And even if you had a positive lie, what's the point? It's not true, even if it's positive. So it shows that truth is very important, and whether it's negative or positive. Okay. And so number 4, very quickly, the book describes what it says as the hedgehog concept. Yeah. And it's this sort of was distilled from a social experiment, but, and when you view foxes versus hedgehogs, and foxes, they would pursue lots of ideas and options and run around the place looking for everything to do. But the idea is that the hedgehog, would focus on one simple unifying idea and then pursue it relentlessly. Yeah. And this concept is sort of dialed around 3 questions. And the intersection of those 3 questions, that is what is defined as the hedgehog concept. And the first question is, what can you be the best at in the world? What can you be the best at in the world? And the second one is, what drives your economic engine, your success engine? What drives that? Is it some value you bring, a service you provide, or a product that you sell? What drives your economic engine? And the third one is, what are you deeply passionate about? What do you love? What do you really love? And those 3 things, where they intersect, we end up finding our hedgehog concept there. It requires an investment of time to go through that, to understand what it is, get opinions widely, from the right people, debate it, leaders, newcomers, old timers, young people, get all sorts of people around the table and have the conversation about what is our hedgehog concept. And when you've gone through that, repeat that exercise till the results are consistent and robust. And then you know that you've landed on exactly what it is. Number 5, as we move quickly now, is following on from this number 4, which is understanding the hedgehog questions, just understanding deeper what they are. So the first question, what can you be the best at? It's very important to differentiate that from not what you want to be the best at. It's not what you want to be the best at, it's what can you be the best at. And also to realize that competence at something is not the same as being the best or world class at it. The fact that we can be competent doesn't mean we're world class. And then also current incompetence in something. If something isn't your current competence, it does not mean that you will never have the ability to be the best at it. You can be. So therefore, it's also important to understand what you cannot be the best at. It's important to separate that so that you can separate the wheat from the chaff, and then laser focus on what it is that you can be the best at. The second question, just delving into that a bit more, what drives your economic engine, your success engine? How do you measure success? And then it's all about, what's your denominator? And when I say denominator, it's like, miles per hour. So the denominator in that case is the hour. Miles per hour is a function of speed, as you know. So for example, you might have your denominator profit per X, per something. Is it, per unit, whatever that is. Or if you're an NGO or a charity, you might be impact, might be your measure, impact per person. Whatever it is, you've got to understand that metric and go for it. It will drive your debates. It will drive your ideas for your success. It will fuel, what you're doing and charge it. And the final question, number 3, is what are you deeply passionate about? What do you love? And what exactly is it that you want to contribute? What do you want to do? What do you want to create? These are some of the questions, because from moving from good to great is about discovering passion, not stimulating it. It's about finding that passion, not stimulating passion you already have. Okay. What truly motivates you? What excites you? And then when you find whatever that is, then find other people to bring on that bus, on that boat, to join you, to supercharge that idea. The hedgehog concept is not a plan. It's not a strategy. It's not a goal. It's not an intention, to be the best. It is an understanding of what you can be the best at. So it's not it's an attempt to be the best. It is figuring out what it is that we could be the best at and going for that. Okay, so very quickly. And those three questions, that intersection point, that is the heart of the matter. So building a culture of discipline, that's the number 6, very quickly. Discipline is very important. And discipline action, it says, without disciplined people, that's impossible to sustain. Discipline action without disciplined people, and discipline action without disciplined thought. That's a recipe for disaster. If you have disciplined action without disciplined thought, it's a recipe for disaster. So if you look at Jesus in Luke 5:16 as our example, often he would withdraw into lonely places and he would pray. In Mark 6:31, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place, it says, speaking to the disciples, I believe. And then Mark 1:35, he talks about very early in the morning, he went to a solitary place to pray. And this is speaking of someone who was extremely self-disciplined. Self-disciplined people are fanatically committed to staying within those 3 circles, those 3 questions. And if you think about Peter and Paul, if you know their stories in the Bible, when Paul, for example, was hit by that light on the road to Damascus, he became a fanatic from someone who was persecuting the church. He became a fanatic who was for the church and preaching the gospel of Christ. And you know that certainly he found his calling. So when companies grow, you can see that bureaucracies would emerge, But why? Why does this happen? When companies grow, you then see bureaucracies. It's to balance the inevitable balancing act that happens when you have competence and incompetence. Hierarchies form, and the whole idea of egalitarianism is, it starts to wither. So some wrong people slipping through the cracks, perhaps, and then you need to have discipline as well in recruitment so as to ensure that we preserve our culture. So if you think about the example of Acts 1:15-26 in the Bible, in the book of Acts 1:15-26, when the apostles were going to replace Judas, who had committed suicide, Matthias was chosen. And that choice was in an act to also preserve the culture and what needed to give continuity to the essence of that team and that group. So it's important to maintain that hedgehog focus. Self-disciplined people within a framework of freedom and responsibility. That's essentially what you're looking for. People who are self-disciplined, but you give them room to be free and to take responsibility and to lead. So that leads to a system that is to be managed, as I said before, rather than people to be chased after. Discipline is also not dictatorship, which is the alternative. It's not dictatorship. Dictatorship is never sustainable. Even if it is for a period of time, it seems to be working. It's not sustainable. And dictatorship, it attracts the weak, people who succumb to force and people who succumb to fear. That's not what you want. You want people who will flourish because they're comfortable. Discipline also helps us to choose what not to do. From good to great, there will be many opportunities along your way if you're on the trajectory from good to great. It's not about creating those opportunities. That won't be the issue. The issue will be selecting the right ones. Okay? So the book talks about having a list of what you should stop doing. But I say also think about a list of what you should start, stop, and continue doing. Okay? And all that is better than just having a to-do list. So it's important to see what you shouldn't do, is the point that has been made here. So when you think about your budgets and funding, it will support your hedgehog concept. When you talk about your objectives and your evaluations, it will focus on your hedgehog concept. It's important to remember this idea of progress, not targets. Keep going and keep progressing and build momentum on the long term. Number 7, using technology to accelerate momentum, not to create it. Using technology to accelerate momentum, but not to create it. So carefully select technologies, that enhance your existing passion. Don't go after tech just for the sake of it. Technology is just not there just to be used because it exists. Your choices in technology need to fit with you guessed it right, your hedgehog concept. You've got to focus on that thing and then apply technology to it. Technology is an accelerator. Everyone knows this, but and it accelerates your momentum. But momentum, this is the key, guys, here. Momentum could be forwards or it could be backwards. Now, if you apply technology to momentum and it's going backwards, it's a different effect from if it's going forward. So technology can accelerate success or it can accelerate demise. So it's important to use technology at the right time for the right purposes. So when technological change itself is rapid, when technology is changing rapidly itself, it's also important to take a crawl, walk, and then run approach. And then that way you ensure that the tech is applied appropriately. And just coming to the end now, just 2 more points. Number 8 is the concept and the idea that the book puts forward, which is the concept of a flywheel. Yeah. And when a flywheel gains momentum, it keeps going faster and faster. And that analogy is about how your company gains the necessary momentum to achieve that greatness, from that leap to greatness from being good. Okay. So when the momentum starts to build and has started already, it's one of the key and most important things is to keep that flywheel moving and keep pushing it in the same direction, because that requires consistency. It's a cumulative effect. It's important to keep going and to remember that every little ounce that we add to this is about adding to that cumulative effect. Regardless of external pressures, it's important to not change course. You know, that sometimes, you know, external pressure with ideas are new things to try, new technologies. Don't change course, whatever the temptation. Ideas to leverage new opportunities, sometimes they're called, so counter the temptation, to do that with discipline. And in the context of Christianity, it's with prayer as well. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 talks about praying without ceasing. It's important to keep going and to keep that momentum. And so remember to keep the conditions right for people as well to flourish, and also to keep pushing the flywheel. Give them the conditions to ensure that they can continue adding to the momentum. And it's all about quiet, deliberate effort, which leads to the breakthrough, that you're looking for inevitably. And finally, number 9, avoid what the book calls the doom loop. Yeah, the loop of doom. So this is very important because it's the temptation to change the direction of the flywheel. That's what it's about. Yeah. It's this temptation that we have to change the direction of the flywheel. And I'll illustrate a few quick examples as to how that happens. Okay, so, when there's this inconsistency, we're going one way, then you turn the other way. Let's try this other thing, or try this or that. And you can almost picture it in companies that have been going well, and at one moment they change direction or they change course. And sometimes, why do they do that? Shortcuts, like some companies go for major acquisitions, and these acquisitions that are not necessarily built on the true breakthrough momentum that the company needs. And sometimes, growth. It's important to remember that growth is not greatness. Not sometimes, all the time. Growth is not greatness. Yeah, you can buy growth. That's in a merger and acquisition of another company, but you must build greatness. You can buy growth, fine, but you must build greatness. So don't suddenly change direction, keep focus and keep focused, okay? And avoid leaders or transitions that switch focus. So sometimes a new leader comes into the organization and says, oh, we're gonna do things differently now. You break all the momentum you've gathered, okay? And that reminds me with my political hat on, my other love, politics, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, one of the greatest leaders, political leaders, certainly of that nation, but also that the planet has seen, what he achieved as a leader over so many decades. And you can see that the consistency that was applied in that example for, so many decades of being in leadership in Singapore with his cohort of leaders, gained that country such a momentum in the flywheel that is still going to today, compared to other governments who started at the same time, other countries who got independent or began pushing their flywheels at the same time, and they're nowhere near where Singapore is today. Okay, so remember finally that good to great is about a long-term build-up, that must transcend people. It's a build-up that transcends people. And what way to end, ladies and gentlemen, by saying that, Matthew 28:16-20, the Great Commission. When Christ was about to leave, that's the message he left with us. And he said, go ye into the world and preach the gospel to all the nations. And Jesus left us carrying on his great work. Yeah. So obviously he'd achieved that greatness and he left us to continue with pushing that flywheel. And as I summarize, just to end very quickly, good to great is very much about identifying and finding that level 5 leadership, and the right people on the bus, the right people on the boat, whichever analogy you prefer, but also in the right seats and the wrong people off. Keep confronting reality. Focus on what your reality is and find that hedgehog concept, that laser focused middle of those 3 questions with strict adherence to those 3 circles. Maintain discipline, it's very important, and accelerate appropriately with technology. And almost finally, keep pushing the flywheel in the right direction. Make sure everything you do contributes to the momentum of your flywheel. Keep pushing. And I want to end by saying, these 3, sort of phrases: ask God, face God, and trust God. And when you do those 3 things, ask him, face him, trust him, then you have, certainly by God's grace, the potential to make that journey from good to great. God bless you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. I hope that was encouraging.